Hello, everybody. Great to be learning with you on a Sunday, Yom Rishon. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house on a Sunday? Yehud in South Carolina, Lucy in Minnesota, Joseph in Massachusetts, Paul in the Great Northwest, Bella in Florida, Melissa in Great Neck, Joe in the Inland Empire, Bill in mid-Missouri. Gonna be preaching for the first time to the full congregation from the book of Samuel. Good luck, Bill. I know you're gonna do great. They're lucky to have you. Mickey Stein wishing everyone Shavua Tov. Karen in Northern California. Ilanit in Silver Spring. Ella's in the house. Welcome, everybody. Nina is away. She's at a women's retreat, so I'm on my own. When we get to the end, I'll have to scan for comments, so bear with me when I need to do that at the end of class. Okay, we are on page 93, page Sadi Gimel, here in Tractate Bava Metzia, the 22nd volume of the Talmud, continuing our journey through chapter 7. Today we're going to open and, God willing, finish Mishna number 6, then open Mishna number 7, and, God willing, finish that, and open and close, God willing, Mishna number 8. 3 Mishnayos and their Gemaras today. So we picked this up a little bit from the top, a couple paragraphs from the top on page 93a with Mishnah number 6. A man, and we actually covered this Mishnah already, but now we're going to get into a different nuance of it. Mishnah number 6. A man can stipulate on his own behalf that he receive a certain increase in his wages instead of eating the produce with which he works, right? The Torah, by Torah law, since he's harvesting, is entitled to eat from that produce that he's harvesting. And he can make a deal with his employer, the owner of the vineyard, the orchard, the field, etc., that instead of eating that food while he's eating, he would like to have a higher wage, and in return, he will give up his right to eat that fruit while he's working. So he can certainly do that on his own behalf. And similarly, he can stipulate this on behalf of his adult son or daughter, on behalf of his adult Canaanite slave or Canaanite maidservant, or on behalf of his wife with their agreement. In other words, he's bringing his whole crew, himself, his wife, his adult children, and his adult slaves when slavery was legal. And he can say, like, I'll be the foreman of this crew. And for all of us, I'm stipulating that we won't eat while we're harvesting, but we'd like slightly higher wages. And he can make that agreement with their consent, right? Because the Torah gives every harvester who's working in that field or vineyard the right to eat while they're harvesting. So he's just acting as their representative, but he can't stipulate like that against their will. Even for his slaves, he has to have their consent in order to do that. Okay, makes perfect sense because they have the basic level of mental competence. They're adults, and that's why they can give up their right and he can speak on their behalf when he's doing that. But he cannot stipulate this same arrangement on behalf of his minor son or daughter, nor on behalf of his minor Canaanite slave or Canaanite maidservant, nor on behalf of his animal, as they do not have the basic level of mental competence to give up that right, to agree to give up that right. The animal, obviously, and minors don't have the ability to give up their rights. And what's interesting is normally a father, can speak on behalf of his children and waive their rights, but not in this case, because God, through the Torah, enables them to eat while they're harvesting. He cannot waive their rights for them, and they cannot waive their rights because they don't understand what they're giving up, and so they will always be able to eat the produce as they're harvesting it. In the case of one who hires a laborer to perform labor with his fourth year fruit, such laborers may not eat the fruit, because fourth year fruit is treated like Meiser Sheni. Either you bring it to Jerusalem, or if you live far enough away, you can sell it and transfer its sanctity onto money, and then you have to bring that money to Jerusalem and consume it, use it to consume food while you are going on the pilgrimage festival, either for Passover, Shavuos, or Sukkot. Right? So the point is you can't eat it. Right? You can't eat that fruit, that fourth year fruit. In the fifth year of these trees, then you can do whatever you want with it. But fourth year fruit is treated like Meiser Sheni, second tithe. So if you hire a laborer to perform labor with fourth year fruit, the laborers can't eat of it. They can't eat it because it has that sanctity. It can only be eaten in Jerusalem. So if he did not inform them beforehand that they were working with fourth year fruit, which they would not be allowed to eat because of this sanctity, then he must redeem the fruit and feed them, because they thought, hey, we're picking fruit, we get to eat that fruit. They didn't realize it was fourth year fruit, so then he owes them that extra. And if his fig cakes broke apart and crumbled so that they must be preserved again, or if his barrels of wine opened, then he hired workers to reseal them. Right? So the problem here is that the fig cakes that were finished, or the barrels of wine that were filled, that is produce that had reached its completion. At that point, it was subject to tithing. And workers who are brought in to work with those products after they reach that point, they don't have this right to consume while they're doing that work, because they're not engaged in the process of harvesting and bringing that produce to completion. That produce has already reached that state. So these workers may not eat of it, as the work of figs or wine had already been completed with regard to the tithes, from which point the laborer may not eat them. And if the employer did not inform his workers that that's what they'd be working on, and therefore they wouldn't have the right to eat, then he must make sure the tithes are separated from that produce and feed them from that produce. Obviously, that's not by Torah law, that's by rabbinic decree, because the workers would have assumed that they would have the right to eat. They didn't get that, and by rabbinic decree, he has to feed them. And the Mishnah adds, watchmen of produce may eat the produce of the field or vineyard by, now here it's translated as local regulations, right? And so the Hebrew is mehilchos medina, meaning the laws of the state, right? That's a more that's more literal translation, but it's more this idea of local regulations. So it's very interesting. What are you talking about with watchmen? We already said that workers who are involved in the work of harvesting, threshing, winnowing, sifting, etc., they're involved in the work of having that produce reach its final state where it's subject to tithing, that they can eat of it. But somebody who is hired to come in and take out weeds or dig ditches in the field where that food is, but they're not involved in the process of harvesting the food, they don't have a right to eat it. Now, what about watchmen? What are watchmen really doing? There's no action, right? What's a watchman doing? He's just present. He's almost like a scarecrow. He's making sure that bad guys don't come and steal, that they can scare away animals. They're guarding, right? So the vast majority of their task is just being there and watching it, and they're not interacting with the produce other than guarding it. So they're not involved in harvesting it, and therefore by Torah law, they don't have a right to eat of it. But mechilchos medina, by the laws of the land, local regulations, a custom in these regions that then acquires the force of law according to the rabbis, they do get to eat of it because they are part of that process as watchmen, even though they're not physically interacting with the produce. So they eat by local regulations, like I said, acquires the force of rabbinic decree, But that's not by Torah law. That's Mishnah number 6. Now the Gemara. The Mishnah mentions watchmen of produce. So Rav says, right, so why does it skip to the last clause of that Mishnah? Because we already covered the previous laws about stipulating on behalf of adults and children and about dealing with fourth-year fruit. So now let's talk about watchmen. So the Mishnah mentions watchmen of produce. Right, the shomrei, the watchman of produce, like a shomer is a watchman, is a guard, right? And it's the same idea, like somebody is shomer Shabbos, so that's somebody who guards himself with respect to violating the prohibitions of Shabbos. So a person who is guarding is a shomer, and plural, right, shomrim. Okay, so the watchman of produce. Rav says they taught this law only with regard to watchmen of gardens and orchards, in which the produce is still attached to the ground, and therefore the watchman would have no legal right to it were it not for the local custom. But watchmen of wine presses and piles of detached produce may eat from them by Torah law, as the decisive factor is whether or not the produce is attached to the ground. Evidently, Rav maintains that one who safeguards, one who is guarding, is considered like one who performs labor, and therefore he has the status of a laborer. If it hasn't been harvested at all yet, so no, right? It's still attached to the ground, and so maybe by local custom they get to eat of it. But if it's already been detached, right? If we're talking about what's already been piled, what's going into the barrels, etc., then even by Torah law, says Rav, these watchmen are participating in the harvest process, and by Torah law they can eat of it. That's Rav. Rav lost this argument. Shmuel is his counterpart, and hear how Shmuel words this law. And Shmuel, the law is according to Shmuel. Conversely, Shmuel says that the sages taught the law of the Mishnah that they may eat by local regulations only with regard to the watchmen of wine presses and piles of detached produce. Okay, once it's detached from the ground, they're still not interacting with it, they're only watching it. But because it's detached from the ground, by rabbinic decree, in light of the local laws which allow this, the watchmen are going to get to eat the way that the people who are winnowing, sifting, threshing, pressing, right? They're doing all these actions onto the produce. These guys are just watching it. But if it's already been detached from the ground, then by this local ordinance, by rabbinic ordinance and local law, they can eat of it like the workers. But watchmen of gardens and orchards, meaning that the produce is still on the tree or still on the vine, they may not eat, neither by Torah law nor by local regulations. And this shows that Shmuel holds that one who safeguards is not considered like one who performs labor, and therefore no watchman is entitled to eat by Torah law. In the particular case of detached produce, there is a local custom to allow a watchman of detached produce to eat from it, and the sages back that up. But if it's still on the tree, still on the vine, the watchmen do not get to eat of it. So Rav Acha bar Rav Huna raises an objection to this reasoning of Shmuel, which did become the law, but Rav Acha is objecting, and he objects from a baraisa. And he's going to bring down a law about the red heifer, right? So with the red heifer, the para aduma, we've talked about this a bunch of times, that when we had the tabernacle in the wilderness, or eventually the first temple in Jerusalem, and eventually the second temple in Jerusalem, so these 1,300 years, right, when we could bring sacrifices on the altar, either in the tabernacle, which was initially in the wilderness, and then it was in Shiloh and a couple other places in the land of Israel, eventually replaced by the Temple of Solomon, stood for about 400 years, eventually replaced by the Second Temple, which stood for about another 400 years. So during this 1,300-year period, if a person was going to enter the courtyards of the Holy Temple, he had to be tahor, ritually pure. And if he had come into contact with a human corpse, either by actually handling a dead body or even walking through a graveyard, walking over a grave, being inside a tent with a corpse, etc., the various ways that you can become tameh from a corpse, he had to go through a purification process that included being sprinkled with a mixture of water and the ashes of a red heifer. In that entire 1,300 years, there were 9 red heifers. Okay, so that's how rare an event it was that a red heifer would be found, pure red, no hair on that cow other than the same color red, never been used for work, never become tameh, etc. All these conditions that had to be met. Then it would be slaughtered. It would be then it would be burned, and then these ashes would be collected. And you only needed a very small amount of ash, and that's why each heifer was able to last for well over 100 years in this mixture with the water, so that people who had come into contact with a mace, with a corpse, could enter and bring sacrifices, etc. Why is this relevant? It's so interesting that the red heifer, which is slaughtered and burned, and create, and its ashes, right, create this mixture, the waters of sprinkling, which purify a person that comes into contact with these sources of ritual impurity. The act of slaughtering and burning the red heifer renders the person who's doing that, and it was a priest, and not usually the high priest, the Kohen Gadol, he would become impure from that process until nightfall. It's a wonderful irony. There's a lot of teachings emerge from that that are outside the scope of today's class. But this idea that which purifies, creating that which purifies others, renders the person doing it impure. So the priest is impure, the one who slaughters the cow, the one who burns the cow, the one who collects the ashes. Everyone involved in that process becomes impure. It's a short impurity. It's not the same impurity as somebody who came into contact with the corpse. He doesn't actually have to be sprinkled with the waters of purification. He will have to immerse in a mikvah and await until nightfall. Why are we talking about all of this? Because there was a watchman involved in the process of slaughtering and burning the red heifer to make sure that it didn't come in, that the red heifer didn't come into contact with impurity at the last moment and render this whole thing, obsolete. So there's a watchman. He doesn't touch the red heifer. But does he become impure as being one of the participants in the process of slaughtering the red heifer and bringing its ashes? Rav Acha bar Rav Huna raises an objection to this reasoning from a baraisa. One who safeguards the red heifer after it has been burned renders his garments impure, in accordance with the law concerning all those who take part in the ritual of the red heifer. The Torah decrees that all those people who take part in the ritual of the red heifer contract impurity themselves, and it is therefore necessary to establish which people are considered to have taken part in this ritual. And if you say that one who safeguards is not considered like one who performs labor, well then why does the one who safeguards the ashes of the red heifer, why does this render his garments impure? He has not performed any physical labor, and Rabbah bar Ula said he does not render them impure due to his work as a watchman. Rather, this is a rabbinic decree, lest he move a limb of the heifer. So he's involved enough that we're not saying that it's because he's a guard, but because there's the potential that he might reach out and touch something while he's involved, and maybe he didn't even notice he was in the area. And that's why we're going to say that he becomes impure. And this would seem to contradict the argument that a watchman participates in the labor, which was our maybe more immediate conclusion. Well, if the watchman became impure, it must be that watchmen are considered to be participating in the labor. Rav Kahana objects. With regard to one who safeguards 4 or 5 cucumber fields, which contain various types of cucumbers and gourds belonging to different people, this one may not fill his stomach from any single one of them. Rather, he must eat from each and every one by a proportionate amount. But if you say that one who safeguards is not considered like one who performs labor, why is he allowed to eat at all? Sounds like the guard is participating in the labor and he's eating by Torah law or by rabbinic decree. Rav Shimi bar Ashi said they taught this law with regard to uprooted cucumbers, concerning which even Shmuel agrees that a watchman may eat them by local regulations, not by Torah law. The Gemara, meaning detached produce, so the Gemara raises a difficulty. Uprooted, but at that stage, hasn't their work already been completed with regard to tithes, and therefore no laborer should be permitted to eat them? And the Gemara answers, this is referring to a case where their blossom had not yet been removed, meaning the cucumbers have been detached to the ground, but there is still some work to do, and that's why the workers can eat of them, and the watchmen also, not by Torah law, but rather by regional decree. So Rav Ashi said it stands to reason that the law is in accordance with the opinion of Shmuel, right? That the watchmen eat not by Torah law, but by local ordinance backed up by the rabbis. And these laborers, as we learned in a Mishna on 87a, and the following laborers may eat by Torah law. A laborer who performs labor with produce attached to the ground at the time of the completion of its work. For example, the one who's harvesting the produce. And a laborer who performs labor with produce detached from the ground before the completion of its work. For example, the one who is winnowing or sifting. And the Mishnah's phrase, by Torah law, proves by inference that with regard to detached produce, there is one who does not eat by Torah law, but rather by Hilchos Medina, local regulations. So the Gemara continues its proof. Now say the latter clause of that Mishnah, and these may not eat. And what is the meaning of may not eat? If we say this means that they may not eat by Torah law, but rather by local regulations, well, that would be the same as the first clause. Rather, is it not correct to say that it means they may not eat at all, neither by Torah law nor by local regulations? And who are the people included in this list? They are the ones who perform labor with produce attached to the ground at the time when it has not reached the completion of its work, like they're weeding but not harvesting, and all the more so watchmen of gardens and orchards who do not perform any significant action. If the one who's weeding, just pulling out weeds, in a patch where there's fruit on the trees may not eat the fruit of the trees, how much less, right? Kal v'chomer, how much less would we say that the watchman, who's not even doing any physical labor, could eat of them while they're still attached? And this functions as a proof for Shmuel's view that the watchmen may not eat by Torah law, but they do eat by local regulation, but not if it's still attached to the tree, only if it's been detached. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 6. Now, Mishnah 7. There are 4 types of bailees to whom different laws apply. 4 types of bailees? Haven't we talked about this already 100 times? The 4 types of bailees, paid bailee, unpaid bailee, the renter, and the borrower? Why are we talking about this now in terms of what the laborer can eat and what he can't eat? Because we were talking about watchmen, and basically a bailee is somebody who is entrusted to safeguard, something, and it could be produce that he's entitled to, that he's paid or just asked as a favor to watch, and perhaps that's why this comes up now. But now, at long last, is the basic law of the 4 kinds of bailees. There are 4 types of bailees to whom different laws apply, and they are as follows: an unpaid bailee, who receives no compensation for safeguarding the item, and the borrower of an item for his own use; a paid bailee, who is provided with a salary for watching over an item; and a renter, who is a bailee who pays a fee in order to use a vessel or an animal. If the item was stolen, lost, broken, or if the animal died in any manner, then the laws are as follows. The unpaid bailee takes an oath over every one of these outcomes, whether the item was lost, stolen, or broken, or if the animal died. The unpaid bailee must take an oath that it happened as he described, and then he is exempt from any payment. The borrower is not even allowed to take an oath because he's liable for all of these outcomes, no matter whether it was lost, stolen, or broken, or if the animal died, the borrower has to pay. So there's no reason for him to take an oath. And the laws of the paid bailee and the renter are the same. They take an oath over an injured animal, over a captured animal, and over a dead animal, attesting that the mishaps were caused by circumstances beyond their control, and they are exempt. But if the animal was lost or stolen, they are liable, so there's no reason to take an oath, they just have to pay. And that's Mishnah number 7. Now the Gemara, and the Gemara asks, who is the Tana who taught this Mishnah about 4 types of bailees? Rav Nachman said that Rabba bar Abu said, it is Rabbi Meir. Rabba said to Rav Nachman, is there any sage who does not accept the law concerning 4 types of bailees? All of the sages agree that the Torah spoke of these 4 types of bailees. And Rav Nachman said to him, this is what I am saying to you, i.e., I mean as follows. Who is the Tana who maintains that the law of a renter is the same as the law of the paid bailee? That is Rabbi Meir. There's 4 types of bailees, but there's only 3 laws, right? There's the law of the borrower who pays in every case. There's the law of the unpaid bailee who takes an oath for every mishap except his own negligence. If he's taking an oath, he's going to be exempt from paying. If he was negligent, he has to pay. And then there's the renter and the paid bailee who are handled in the same way. If it's lost or stolen, they're liable. If it's mishap beyond their control, they would take the oath and they're not liable. But the paid bailee and the renter are treated the same. So the Gemara raises a difficulty. But didn't we say that Rabbi Meir said the opposite? As it is taught in a baraisa with regard to a renter whose law is not stated in the Torah, a renter is mentioned, but it doesn't say what his outcome is. How does he pay? I.e., in which cases is he liable to pay? Rabbi Meir says he pays in the same cases as an unpaid bailee. Rabbi Yehuda says he pays in the same cases as a paid bailee. So we're going to say the renter and the paid bailee are in the same boat. That seems to be according to Rabbi Yehuda, not according to Rabbi Meir. And the Gemara explains, Rabba bar Abu teaches this baraisa in the opposite manner to the version here, meaning the idea that the renter and the paid bailee are in the same boat is according to Rabbi Meir, not according to Rabbi Yehuda. So the Gemara asks a question with regard to the accepted number of bailees. Well, if so, that the same law applies to a renter and a paid bailee, why does the Tan of the Mishnah say that there are 4 bailees? In fact, there's only 3. And Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak said that the Mishnah should be understood as follows. There are 4 types of bailees whose laws are 3. The Gemara relates, incident. There was a certain shepherd who was herding animals on the bank of the Papa River, when one of the animals slipped and fell into the water and drowned. He came before Rabbah, and Rabbah exempted him from payment. Rabbah stated the following reasoning in support of his ruling. What could he have done? A drowning of this kind is a circumstance beyond his control. And although a shepherd is a paid bailee, he is exempt from liability in circumstances beyond his control. Now we're on page 93b. He safeguarded them in the manner that people safeguard, and he is not required to do anything more, right? So this is a reasonableness standard. Reasonable. He performed his job as you can reasonably expect a shepherd to perform his job. He didn't do anything wrong. He wasn't negligent. These were circumstances beyond his control. So he takes an oath that that's what happened and he doesn't have to pay. Abaye said to Rabbah, if that is so, in a case where the shepherd entered the city at a time when other people enter, as shepherds normally do, when the animals are grazing in a quiet and safe place, and a theft occurred at that hour, so too will you say that he is exempt? And Rabbah said to him, yes, if you're telling me that all the shepherds customarily leave the animals grazing at a certain hour of the day because it's considered a safe area for them to do that, and the shepherds go eat lunch together, let's say in a nearby village, and so he's not watching the animals, but it is customary for the shepherds to behave this way, then why would I find him liable for being absent when, something happened to the animal if he was behaving in an ordinary and reasonable manner? Rabbah said to him, yes, I would exempt him. But Abaye raised a further difficulty. Well, if he slept a little at a time, when people generally sleep, so too is he exempt? And Rabbah said, yeah, if he is sleeping at the time that shepherds normally sleep, then he's behaving in the customary reasonable way. Why should he be liable if there's a mishap? So now Abaye, he's like Perry Mason, right? He's like the lawyer reeling in his witness. Now he's getting ready. So Abaye raised an objection to him from a baraisa. These are the circumstances beyond one's control for which a paid bailee is exempt. For example, as it is stated in the verse, the oxen were plowing and the donkeys feeding beside them, and the Sabaeans made a raid and took them away, and they have slain the servants with the edge of the sword. That's from Job 1:15. So this teaches that only a robbery by an army is considered circumstances beyond his control, but nothing less. So, okay, maybe the shepherd, behaved like the other shepherds do, but maybe all of the shepherds are taking a chance that while they're away and having a lunch together in the village and leaving their animals in what they think is a safe place, and then something actually happens, hey, they're in your care. You are charged with guarding those animals. So unless an army with weapons and chariots, etc., came and ripped that animal away from you, you're liable. Doesn't matter that all the shepherds are doing it. They should all be liable if the animal is lost when they're not present, when the shepherd who is charged with guarding the animal is not present. That's Abaye's argument. Pretty good argument. Rabbah said to him, well, in the case you're talking about, there it is referring to city watchmen, i.e. professionals hired to watch over city property, who are exempt due to an occurrence on that scale, i.e. a military incursion. Now you're talking about professional watchmen, that's all they do. And the reason they do it is to guard the whole city from an invasion. Yeah, they have a higher standard of liability, and it doesn't matter what they think they can do. They need to be on the job for all the hours that they're on duty. And if they, go have lunch and they've developed a habit that they all have lunch at the same time and just leave their posts, and then something bad happens, of course they're going to be liable. But we're not going to extend the same standard of city watchmen who are protecting the city from marauders. We're not going to extend that level of care to shepherds. There's only one shepherd for that flock. And if he's going to be held to that standard, he's never going to be able to sleep or eat. What the heck are you talking about? So Abaye is still going. Abaye raises a different objection to Rabbah from another baraisa. To what extent is a paid bailee obligated to safeguard? All right, let's get to the nitty-gritty. He is obligated to the extent that Jacob, our forefather Jacob, of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that our forefather Jacob said to Lavan, right, his father-in-law, quote, thus I was. In the day, the drought consumed me, and the frost by night. Genesis 31:40. Remember, Jacob will complain to his father-in-law, hey, I watched your animals night and day. I froze. I gave up sleep. If an animal came and took one of your animals, I bore the loss, right? So isn't that the archetype of what a shepherd's responsibilities are? And it seems like Jacob held himself to a pretty high standard, right? In the day, the drought consumed me, and the frost by night. So that is like the level of the city watchman. And Rabbah said to him, well, there too, that baraisa that you're bringing is actually speaking of the level of obligation of city watchmen. We learn what the duties of a city watchman are from the degree of responsibility to which our forefather Jacob held himself when he was watching the animals of Lavan. And Abaye said to him, is that to say that Jacob, our forefather, whose statement is the source of this law, was a city watchman? What are you talking about? Those are the standards of city watchmen. Jacob was a shepherd. Why would we compare shepherds to city watchmen? He was a shepherd. Why aren't we going to say that the obligations of a shepherd are based on the obligations that Jacob took upon himself when he was working as a shepherd for 20 years? Rava replied, it means that Jacob said to Lavan, I safeguarded for you an extra level of safeguarding, like the level of city watchman. But this was because he was holding himself to a more stringent level. It's not normal for a shepherd to be held to that level of obligation. Jacob undertook that, but we're not going to impose that level of responsibility on all shepherds. And Abaye raised another objection to Rabbah from a different baraisa with regard to a shepherd who was herding the animals of others, and he left his flock, and he came to the town. If in the meantime a wolf came and tore the animal to pieces, or a lion came and trampled one of his flock, we do not say definitively that had he been there, he would have rescued them, and therefore he is liable due to his absence. Rather, the court estimates with regard to him, if he could have rescued his animal by chasing a beast of this kind away, he is liable, as his departure from the scene was certainly a contributing factor to the damage. And if not, he's exempt from liability. That's the whole baraisa. Now let's get to why Abaye is bringing it. Now what? Is this baraisa not referring to a case when the shepherd enters the town at a time when other people usually enter? And even so, we're going to evaluate that had he been there, if he would have been able to chase away the wolf and he wasn't there, he's going to be liable. So it doesn't matter that he was reasonably away when the other shepherds are away from their flocks. If he could have prevented the loss when this wolf or this coyote came, had he been there, we're going to say that he's liable. So it's no excuse that just because all the other shepherds left their flocks alone and he went with them, that he's going to be dismissed from liability. No, he is liable as long as he could have reasonably prevented the harm. Right? So no, I'm sorry. So this presents a difficulty to the opinion of Rabbah, who says if he's reasonably away like other shepherds, he wouldn't be liable. So what does Rabbah say? Rabbah answers, no. This is speaking of one who enters at a time when other people do not usually enter. He was away from his flock when he shouldn't have been away from the flock. And Abaye retorts, well, if so, why is he exempt, even if he could not have rescued the animal? This is a mishap that came about initially through negligence, right? If he's away when not even at a time when other shepherds are away from their flocks because he just wandered off when he shouldn't have wandered off, then he was negligent. And if then an accident happened while he was being negligent, meaning a lion came and tore up the sheep. Now, even if he'd been there, he could not have stopped the lion from grabbing one of those sheep. But the fact that he was away in an unauthorized period means that this incident began with negligence and ended with an accident beyond his control. Now, if he had been present, he would not have been liable. Accident beyond his control, meaning he couldn't have stopped the lion. But since it began with negligence, do we impose liability? Says Abaye, this is a mishap that came about initially through negligence and ultimately by accident. And in a case of this kind, the shepherd is liable. He is liable because when he left, he was negligent. So Rabbah explains Rabbah is going to answer. It is referring to one who heard the sound of a lion roaring, and he entered the city to save himself. He wasn't negligent when he ran away from the flock. He ran away to save his own life from the lion. In such a case, his actions were not initially negligent, but rather what chased him away is the same action that ended up killing the sheep, namely something beyond his control. He ran away from the lion to save his own life, and then that same lion that he couldn't fight ate one of the sheep. So the whole thing was beyond his control. But Abaye challenges Rabbah. If so, what is the relevance of the statement the court estimates with regard to him? What could he have done to prevent an attack by a lion? And Rabbah says, well, he should have faced the lion. He could have faced the lion. He should have faced the lion with other shepherds and with sticks to chase it away. It's not that any time a lion comes, it's correct for the shepherd to run away, Maybe it's a small lion and there's several shepherds, and it's well known that a lion will not come and take a sheep if there's 3 or 4 shepherds acting together and shouting and waving their staffs. That would scare the lion away. So it's not like you have a blanket permission to run away when you hear the roar of a lion. You have to evaluate the situation, right? What was the reasonable action in those circumstances? Abaye then challenges again. Well, if that's the case, why specifically state this law with regard to a paid bailee? The same would hold true even for an unpaid bailee. As wasn't it you, Master Rabbah, who said that an unpaid bailee who had the option of facing an animal with other shepherds and with sticks and did not face it in this manner, he would be liable. Even the unpaid bailee would be liable because, remember, an unpaid bailee is liable if he's negligent. And if all you needed to do to scare away the lion was for you and the other shepherds who were present to go away, lion, and the lion would have went away and you didn't bother to do that, sure, that's negligence. And even the unpaid bailee would be liable, and how much more a paid bailee? So what does Rabbah say? Rabbah answers, an unpaid bailee is liable only if he could have gathered together these other shepherds to help him defend the animals free of charge. Whereas a paid bailee is obligated to do so even if it costs him money to get the other shepherds to help him. And so the Gemara asks, and up to how much must a paid bailee pay the other shepherds for this extra protection? And the Gemara answers, up to the sum of the value of the animals that he is responsible to safeguard. And the Gemara asks, but in that case, it seems that a paid bailee must pay from his own pocket to protect the animals from marauding beasts. Where have we found with regard to a paid bailee that he is liable for circumstances beyond his control? Everyone agrees that this loss was caused by circumstances beyond the bailee's control, and yet he must bear the expenses indirectly. And the Gemara responds, the law is that he may return and take the money that he paid for these additional guards from the owner. He's not going to bear the loss, but he has to tell these other shepherds, listen, we'll pay you, meaning my master will pay me, my employer will pay you, but help me guard and scare away these lions. Rav Papa said to Abaye, if it's going to cost the owner the same up to the amount of money that the animals are worth to pay extra shepherds to scare away the lions, so what's the point, right? He's going to bear the same loss. Either he's going to bear the loss of the lost animals, or it could be the same amount of money to pay shepherds to keep those animals alive. So what's the point? Rav Papa said to Abaye, if so, what benefit does the owner of the animals receive from this? Any potential loss that he avoided from the lion will end up being paid to the extra guards. And Abaye replied, the practical difference concerns the fitness of and his familiarity with the animals. Meaning, although it makes no difference to him financially, if he had to purchase other animals, he would lose those animals that he knows. And he would rather keep his own livestock that he's worked with. Alternatively, it also matters with respect to the additional effort that would be required to acquire the replacement animals. Now, as demonstrated in the above discussion, Rabbah maintains that even a paid bailee is required to safeguard and take care of the animals only in the normal fashion, right? So we're back to the question that Rabbah and Abaye are arguing about. If the guy acted reasonably, meaning like all the shepherds in this area act, at a certain time in the day, they, go have lunch and leave their animals in what seems like a safe place, then if a wolf comes and takes one of the animals, why should the paid bailee be liable? He acted reasonably. And Abaye is saying, well, all these shepherds are taking that chance, but if they could have been there and saved the animal from the wolf, it really wasn't reasonable, and he should be liable, and he's liable because he was paid to guard the animals. So where are we? So as demonstrated above discussion, Rabbah maintains that even a paid bailee is required to safeguard and take care of the animals only in the normal fashion. And by contrast, Rav Chisda and Rabbah bar Rav Huna do not hold in accordance with this opinion of Rabbah, as they say that the owner can tell the bailee, it was for this reason that I hired you and that I gave you a wage. so that you should safeguard for me with an additional level of safeguarding, not for you to go and eat and sleep like other people. So the Gemara relates an incident. Bar Ada, the porter, was transporting animals across the narrow bridge of Neresh when one animal pushed another and cast it into the water, and the animal drowned. So the case came before Rav Papa, and he deemed the porter liable. So Bar Ada, the porter, said to him, "What should I have done?" And Rav Papa said to him, "You should have transported them one by one across the bridge so that one couldn't push another off it." The porter said to him, "Do you know of the son of your sister who can transport them one by one?" This is a saying that they had in that time. In other words, are you aware of anyone who can do such a thing? It is virtually impossible. You can't take the animals across one by one. It will take too long. The animals on the other side, I'm not going to be able to watch them while I'm bringing the others across. That's not how we do things. We bring them across in a group. So Rav Papa said to him, "You know what? The very earliest scholars before you already shouted and complained about this same thing, but no one paid attention to them. Since you are an expert and you are hired for the purpose of porting these animals across the river, the responsibility is yours. And if it happens now and then that one of these animals pushes another animal off the bridge, yeah, well, that's your loss. You know, if you can't avoid it, then you should be prepared to pay now and then for that loss." Now, the Gemara relates another incident. Ivu deposited flax with a bailee in the house of Ronya, and a robber called Shabu went and forcibly snatched the flax from him. Eventually, the thief was identified and caught, and the matter came before Rav Nachman, who rendered the bailee liable. And the Gemara asks, shall we say that Rav Nachman disagrees with the opinion of Rav Huna bar Avin? What does Rav Huna bar Avin say? Rav Huna bar Avin sent this ruling in a case where an animal was stolen in a circumstance beyond his control, right? Beyond his control, so he shouldn't be liable, and the thief was subsequently identified and captured. If the bailee is an unpaid bailee, so the following distinction applies. If he wishes, he takes an oath that he did not misappropriate the animal before it was stolen. And now the owners must go and claim the value from the thief, right? The unpaid bailee, he did his job. A thief took it. They caught the thief. How are we going to extract property and the penalty payment of a thief? Who is liable? Who is responsible to take, to basically bring the thief to court, prove the case, and then extract from him the value of what he stole, plus the additional, 100% payment, the double payment of the thief. Who's liable to bring that action? Is it the unpaid bailee? No. He takes an oath. I wasn't negligent. He's out of it. So it's the owner of the animal who suffered the loss that has to now take this thief to court. But if the bailee is a paid bailee, he enters into judgment with the thief and does not take an oath. Since the rule, because a paid bailee, right, is responsible for theft. That's why he's getting paid, to prevent theft. So since the ruling of Rav Nachman was in the case of an unpaid bailee, why should an unpaid bailee ever have to deal with the thief? And Rav has said the cases are not the same. As there in the ruling of Rav Nachman, men from the government, like police, were standing nearby, which means that if he had simply raised his voice, they would have come and rescued him. Since it was his own negligence that caused the robbery, he must find a way to collect the money from the robber, right? Remember, an unpaid bailee is liable if he's negligent. So he doesn't have a very high degree of responsibility, but in modern parlance, if all he has to do to save the owner's property from being stolen is call 911, and he doesn't bother to call 911, okay, so he's negligent, and when they find the thief later, he's going to be the one who has to go get the money from the thief. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 7 here in chapter 7. Mishnah 8, and we're pretty close to done. Mishnah number 8. One wolf that approaches a flock and attacks, this is not considered a circumstance beyond one's control, as the shepherd can drive away a lone wolf. But an attack by 2 wolves, this is considered a circumstance beyond the shepherd's control. Rabbi Yehuda says, at a time of wolf attacks, when many wolves come out of hiding and pounce on animals at every corner, even an attack by a lone wolf is considered a circumstance beyond one's control. An attack of 2 dogs, this is not a circumstance beyond one's control. Yadua the Babylonian says in the name of Rabbi Meir, if the 2 dogs came and attacked from one direction, it is not a circumstance beyond his control. But if they attack from 2 different directions, then this is a circumstance beyond one's control, as the shepherd cannot protect his flock from 2 dogs at opposite ends of the flock at the same time. If bandits came, this is considered a circumstance beyond one's control. Bandits means armed bandits. Likewise, with regard to an attack by a lion, a bear, a leopard, a cheetah, and a snake, these are each considered a circumstance beyond the control, beyond the shepherd's ability to stop it. When is an attack by one of the above considered beyond his control, which means that a paid bailee is exempt? It is when the dangerous beasts or bandits came of their own accord to the usual grazing spot. But if the shepherd led his flock to a place where groups of beasts or bandits are present, well, then this is not a circumstance beyond his control, because he shouldn't have taken the animals to that dangerous spot. Meaning where it's known that there's this increased danger from beasts or bandits, he shouldn't have taken the flock there. And if he did, he's negligent, he's liable. If the animal died in its normal manner, this is considered a circumstance beyond one's control. If he afflicted it by overworking it or by negligent treatment and it died, this is not a circumstance beyond his control. If the animal ascended to the top of a cliff and fell off and died, this is a circumstance beyond the shepherd's control. But if the shepherd himself brought the animal to the top of the cliff and then it fell down and died, this is not a circumstance beyond his control. He shouldn't have taken the animal to that dangerous place. That's Mishnah number 8. Like I said, now I'm very close to done. Questions or comments, please get them in. The Gemara asks, but isn't it taught in a baraisa that an attack by a lone wolf is considered a circumstance beyond one's control? And Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak said the baraisa is speaking of a time of wolf attacks, and it is the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda in our Mishnah. When there's lots of wolves attacking, then what's the shepherd going to do? He can't stop this lone wolf and that lone wolf. It's like 2 dogs attacking the flock from opposite ends. The Mishnah teaches that if bandits came, this is considered a circumstance beyond one's control. And the Gemara asks, why? Let one man stand against another man. The shepherd should defend his flock and fight the bandit, as that is what he was hired to do. And Rav said the Mishnah is referring to armed bandits, against whom the shepherd cannot reasonably be expected to defend the flock. A dilemma was raised before the sages if the case involved an armed bandit and an armed shepherd, then what is the law? Do we say let one man stand and fight against another man? Or perhaps this bandit is willing to risk his life and the shepherd is not prepared to risk his life. And the Gemara answers, it stands to reason that this one will risk his life and that one would not risk his life. Consequently, the shepherd is not held responsible if he refuses to fight the bandit. He was hired to guard sheep, not to fight armed bandits. Abaye, unless maybe you can make a deal with a particular kind of shepherd who gets paid a lot more, that I'm hiring you and paying you, triple wages, because if armed bandits come, you're going to fight them with, your fellow armed shepherds. But that would have to be specifically stipulated. Without such a stipulation, no, you don't expect a shepherd to put up such a fight. Abaye said to Rava, what is the law if the shepherd found a known thief and said to him, you dirty thief, in such and such a place where we shepherds sit, we have such and such men with us, and such dogs with us, and such slings with us. In other words, we are fully protected, and you should not dare to take anything from us. You seeing what the problem is? Who knows if this thief even knew about that location? Why is this shepherd starting the interaction with the thief by taunting him? Now he's saying we're very strong and you shouldn't think that we're going to be an easy mark. Don't come around and steal from us. But maybe because he said this is why that thief is going to be drawn to that situation and think, oh, this shepherd protests too much. Maybe he's full of it. I'm going to take my chances. And that wouldn't have happened if the shepherd hadn't opened his big mouth. So if the thief subsequently went and took an animal from him, then what is the law? And Rava said to Abaye, it is as though he has taken them to a place where beasts and bandits abound, as his taunting of the thief motivated the theft. So that is the law of the thief. The shepherd would be liable because he taunted that thief. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 8. Tomorrow, God willing, at the regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific, on Monday, we will pick up on page 94a with Mishnah number 9. Okay, like I said earlier, Nina is away at a women's retreat, so I'm scanning the comments for the questions myself. Let's see. Joseph, I'm noticing all these different benchmark ideas that are foundational for other important laws that are built upon them. As I understand it, the Talmud is not necessarily in linear timeline, 100%. As the Seders and tractates, the orders of a Seder is a group of tractates. There are 6 Sedarim, 6 orders of tractates in the Talmud. As the Seders and tractates are arranged, I'm just marveling at the sage's ability to memorize all this without a finished product to study in a certain order. Amen. Exactly. I am in awe of the sages, right along with you, Joseph. Beautiful observation. Bill, if the other shepherds all jumped off a bridge, would you? That's Abaye's argument, right? Very good. Joseph, I actually had experience today guarding a marketplace at a festival. I had a possible shoplifting situation that if I confronted him, it could be a liability, but if I allow it, also a liability. Right, exactly. And I've gone through that same training in Maganam. We're just volunteer guards, armed guards of our synagogues, and some guys are guarding Jewish schools, but we receive all the training, vis-a-vis California and the state laws of what would be our obligations, if we were at a mall, if we were in a marketplace, if we were hired to prevent shoplifting, and basically the bottom line is armed guards, we can only intercede, with a gun if there is imminent danger to life, right? You can't, in California at least, you can't draw your weapon to prevent shoplifting. For that kind of thing, observe and report, right? You call the police for that. We are not police. That's just the laws of, licensed security guards in California. But here where we're talking about shepherds, we do have similar questions, right? What can reasonably be expected of that guard? And, understanding what that law is protects the guard, protects the employer, because we have a good sense of, what situations can we reasonably expect him to get up and get involved, and what situations not, right? So very good observation. Bill, Sharon, been here, but driving home from the airport. Shalom from New Jersey. That shirt's for you, Sharon. Bill, also the shepherd just gave the bandit an itemized list of what he can expect to face. Exactly. What's he taunting the thief for and telling him exactly what our defenses are? Of course he's going to increase the likelihood that the thief will now, knowing what he's going to face, create a plan for stealing from these guys exactly according to what their defenses are. Says Bill, why thank you. I appreciate you telling me exactly how many buddies I need to rob you blind. Just so. That's what I've got for us today. And with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow, 6 p.m. Pacific. Have a good night. I must say, this was an enjoyable daf to teach. I hope you enjoyed learning it because these issues just seem so tangible and real world, and I can get my hands and brain around them. So I hope you enjoyed that too. All the best.